There, we are live. Bobbie Bensur here from Baker and Taylor Cats. Hoping everyone is enjoying their summer and getting a lot of good reads in and reading a ton of graphic novels. This one is for the graphic novel fans out there. The second in our series of events with some awesome authors for summer reading. I am joined today by Victoria Jamieson and John Gallagher, and I'm really excited to formally introduce them now. And then we're going to get to talk to them about their books and about their careers and about the graphic novel, world. And they're even going to do some drawing and storytelling for us right here on the spot. So without any further ado, hello, welcome both.
Hey,
um, Victoria Jamieson is a New York Times bestselling author and illustrator of many books for children, including the graphic novel Roller Girl, which was awarded a 2016 Newbery Honor. And her newest graphic novel, When Stars Are Scattered, co-written with Omar Mohammed, is a National Book Award finalist. She lives with her family in Pennsylvania, and you can visit her at victoriajamieson.com. Welcome, Victoria. I love how colorful your studio is there.
I'm showing you the neat parts of my studio.
Very cool. And John Gallagher is the art director of NWF's Ranger Rick magazine, co-founder of Kids Love Comics, an organization that uses graphic novels to promote literacy, and leads workshops teaching kids how to create their own comics, which is kind of what we're doing here today. John lives in Virginia with his wife and their 3 children, plus a cat and a dog. We love cats here and dogs too. And one thing that the audience, oh, and you can visit him at maxmeow.com. Welcome, John.
hi.
Love your setup there too. Yeah.
Thank you.
And I'm sure the audience will be just really giddy to know, as I did, that you each have fans in your household and your children of each other's work. And we just got a chance to say hello before we went live, which I just think is really cool.
That's right. My 13-year-old is probably watching right now and just blocking out my part of the screen just so he can listen to Victoria talk.
Yeah. And my puppy cool. Max Meow has the bookmark that I'm not allowed to move because that's where we left off last night.
Well, I think it's a testament to just how popular your books are and how graphic novels are for readers of all ages, including myself. So I'm just excited to get into it. So I guess we're going to start off with a really general question. Many of us watching today are already fans. For those of us who just need a reminder or are coming to your work for the first time, because libraries all over the country are watching now, can you tell us a little bit about your books? Victoria, your latest book, When Stars Are Scattered, and John, the Max Meow series. Victoria, you want to start? And you could also talk about all of your portfolio as well.
Okay. Well, my portfolio of books is not all that big because graphic novels take such a long time. But my first graphic novel is Roller Girl, followed by my next one, which is All's Fair in Middle School, which John's son told me he did a book report on. So he may be interested to know this was a previous cover. Then we changed the cover to the newer version. This is the arc before it became a book. And then my latest book is When Stars Are Scattered. And so this book is different than my other books because I wrote it with somebody else, my co-author, Omar Mohammed. And this book is based on his life story. So Omar is the older brother, and he's here on the cover with his younger brother, Hassan. And it's their life story of growing up in a refugee camp in Kenya. They were both born in Somalia and had to flee when Omar was about 4 years old. So it was a really interesting and great experience working on this with Omar and getting to know Omar and getting to know his family. So yeah, I'm really proud of this latest book. It came out, I guess, about over a year ago now. So that's my portfolio of books.
Yes, and I love that one. And I was telling you earlier that I learned a lot reading that, and I just am eager to learn more about how him and his brother are doing. So I hope we hear more from him as well. All right, John.
Well, I am the author of Max Meow, Cat Crusader, and the first book came out last October. It's the tale of a podcasting cat who gets superpowers by taking a bite of an outer space meatball. And he hangs out with his best friend, super scientist Mindy Microbe, who sort of throws science facts in through the story and even becomes a superhero on her own at some point. And the second book just came out a couple months ago, Max Meow, Donuts in Danger. And then the third one is actually coming out this September. I'll just give you a quick sneak preview. This is a mock-up of the cover. It's called Max Meow, Pugs from Planet X. So right now that's taking up all my time. I've done comics and things before, but this is really my biggest project so far.
Awesome. I would love to learn, and I'm sure the audience would too, your inspiration for your latest works. I know that you have something new in the works, Victoria, but I think it would be really fun now that we just learned about these books to see you guys in the act of drawing them. Would you mind each taking through the audience through a little tutorial of how to draw your favorite, one of your favorite characters, if not your favorite character from your books?
Sure.
Yeah. So when I draw for kids, and if anyone at home has some paper and pencil, feel free to draw along with us. I think it's super fun when people draw along with us, because I try and make my characters simple so that other people can draw them. So one of the characters I like to show kids how to draw is Astrid from Roller Girl, because she's got blue hair. It's pretty fun to draw. So when I draw Astrid, and when I draw any character, really, I try and use really simple shapes. John, I'll be curious to see your drawing method too, because I feel like some of the great books that I love just use simple shapes so they're easy to identify and easy to draw again. So the first shape I usually draw for Astrid is a semicircle, which is the helmet. And when I draw my human faces, the next shape I often draw is the letter U. And it's kind of like a basic face shape, kind of like a Mr. Potato Head doll that you can add eyes and nose and mouth on top of. And Roller Girl was my first book starring human figures, so I was a little worried about drawing humans. All of my other books had been animals, and frankly, I think animals are more easy to draw. So I tried to really simplify my human characters so I wouldn't be overwhelmed. So for eyes, I will often just do 2 dots. When I do this with kids, I like to stop them and point out that it looks like a mushroom at this point in the drawing. But that is a key to knowing that sometimes you get halfway through a drawing and it looks terrible, but you should keep going because it will probably get better. Okay, for the nose, I will often write the letter C or a backwards letter C, depending on which way my character is looking. And then I add the mouth. And another thing I like to point out to kids when we're doing drawings together is that I really don't think you need to be the best artist in the world to make graphic novels. There are plenty of better artists in the world out there than I am, but I try to be clear in my drawings. I think that's my big job as an illustrator, is to communicate my ideas clearly in my drawings. So that's what I try to do. And because I'm not the best artist in the world, I always come across things in the making of my books that I have a really hard time drawing. When I was making Roller Girl, I discovered, to my chagrin, that I don't know how to draw braids. I find braids really, really difficult to draw, and a big part of the story is Astrid wearing her hair in blue braids. So I had to figure out how to draw it. So I ended up kind of making it up and fudging it. So I kind of draw the braids like this, which if you look closely, does not actually resemble actual braids. But a big part of being an artist and an illustrator for me is just faking it and pretending you know how to draw stuff, but you're actually not that great at drawing. I'm still not great at drawing cars. If you look at the cars in my books, they're kind of all the same car, but in different colors. So yeah, that's the takeaway I like to leave during my drawing videos and tips is you don't have to be perfect. Just do the best job you can and tell the story the best way you can, and your drawings will get better the more you practice. So yeah, there's Astrid. Quick and simple drawing of Astrid.
How'd I do?
Awesome. It looks great.
Wow, ta-da!
Yeah. I got really
Amazing. I love that.
now I just have to learn how to do your signature.
Well, I think you're a great artist, Victoria, and it is all about interpretation. And I'm sure there are kids out there watching that are just doing what John just did just now. So very, very cool. All right, John, here we go.
Okay. Well, Victoria, I loved what you did, and I'm really impressed because you kind of kept your eye on the screen while you were drawing, and I think that takes that's kind of a superpower to be able to do that. And so I'm going to pull up. I may turn my head a little bit, but I also use very simple shapes. And when I started to do Max Meow, the reason my inspiration was I was teaching an after-school comics class, and I wanted to get the kids sort of going. So I said, let's use simple shapes. And I told them, if you can draw these three shapes, a circle, a triangle, and a square, you could probably turn that into just about anything. So for Max Meow, what I tell people is, do an oval, sort of a squash circle, and just add some triangles, and you're already at the point where you've got a cat shape. And so for Max, I really did try hard, and I've, when you draw it so many times, you start to add little extra things. But this is sort of my starting point with Max, is we just draw a line straight across the middle of his head, and then it's time for another triangle, but this one's upside down for his nose. And for Max's eyes, I do kind of like you do, Victoria. I do dots, except I try to stretch them just a little bit more, or it can even be lines like that, but I like them to be a little rounded. And, I'll fill in like almost all of the dots. So I have those little highlights that are so popular. And then for Max, I just give him a little bit of a crooked smile. I think because I have a crooked smile. So I just, and then the letter C. But I love what you said, Victoria, about the letter C being a nose, because that's how I draw Mindy, Max's friend. And then for the body, you don't have to get too complex. I actually draw kind of this shape where I make the top part is almost like the top of a salt shaker. And the bottom part is kind of like this shape where it's a square or a rectangle where I've pushed in the edges. And I've got kind of a big salt shaker there. For Max's arms, he wears just a t-shirt because he's just wearing things that Mindy helped him find around the lab. I add part of a square or rectangle for his arms. And then it's time for the cape, where I draw, and Max doesn't have a cape like Batman that's part of his cowl and is really cool. It's more like when you go to the swimming pool in the summer and you take a towel and you tie a knot and run around pretending to be Superman. I mean, I can only say this from my experience, but I haven't done that for 2 or 3 years at the local pool. They don't like me to do that anymore. Just kidding, just kidding. Okay, so I'm going to draw a little circle for the knot and kind of 2 shapes that look like leaves for his cape, like where he's pulled his cape out. And then for his cape, we're just going to add a swoop. It's kind of just a wavy shape, swoop. And it's even fun to say. I'll do this here, swoop and swoop. We're almost done. It's hard to believe, but we're just going to draw 2 lines sticking out for his arms. And then I bet most of you have drawn puffy clouds before. I know I have. And that's kind of how I draw Max's paws sometimes. Like 3 puffs. Puff, 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 puff. And for his shorts, again, it's just some squares kind of overlapping. And I just fill that in with pencil or marker. And then for his legs, we're just going to do those 2 lines again. And they're parallel. So that means that they go in the same direction, but they don't meet. And that's, of course, because he's got feet. And for that, I'm just going to do another oval. I kind of think Calvin and Hobbes is a comic strip I loved as a kid. And he always drew them. They look kind of like baked potatoes. So I think of them as baked potatoes. And then I do 3 lines for his, where his paws are. And then it's time for the lightning bolt. And the lightning bolt, you kind of have to practice that. That's taking two zigzags and connecting them. I've drawn a lot of lightning bolts because the very first superhero I ever discovered, this is a copy of the comic that my first comic as a kid was Shazam. And some of you may know Shazam from the movie, but he's got a big lightning bolt, and that was an inspiration. And then finally, it's time to just do like drawing a string and another string that goes along, and it's time for Max's tail. And I have a little zigzag because he's got an orange tip there. And I'll even add some zigzags for electricity coming off of his electric tail. So that's how I draw Max Meow. And again, using simple shapes just like Victoria showed you.
That's mine.
Oh,
ta-da!
So fun.
I love it.
So interesting because you can see each of your own unique styles in the interpretation of each other's works. That's super cool.
And it's an astrid too. That's so fun.
Well, thank you so much for that. Hopefully, if there are those out there that drew along with Victoria and John, we can find a way to see what you've done and share with them in this virtual world of ours. We'll try to figure that out. So I guess we have some audience questions, and maybe we'll take those. And then I was hoping to learn a little bit about your Victoria, you talked about how long it takes to work on a graphic novel. So I think the audience would love to know about your creative process, each of yours, how you got into this career, and any inspiration for your books. Again, the books that you shared today, Victoria, are so different, and John, there is a lot of science elements. And so I think, I know that's like 10 questions in one, but that's everything on my mind. But before we get there, let's see what the audience has to say here. Okay, so we're gonna take this one because it has to do with the tutorial. These characters may be made from simple shapes, but how did you come up to design them into unique characters?
That is a good question. And I feel like a lot of my characters, maybe like John mentioned Calvin and Hobbes, and that was one of my favorite cartoons growing up too. So something I do with my characters, because the faces are kind of similar, like I use very simple shapes, so they're going to look similar. So for each character, I think I try and come up with something that's unique about them. So like Calvin had that big spiky hair and the red shirt with the black stripes. So whenever you see spiky hair and a red shirt with black stripes, you're like, oh, there's Calvin. So Astrid, for example, has blue hair, so that even if she looks like other characters, you see blue hair and you know it's Astrid. So I think I try and give each of my characters something about them that stands out, whether it's their hair or the clothes they like to wear, some distinguishing feature that sets them apart from a crowd. And when stars are scattered, because there's a lot of crowd scenes where there are a lot of people. So one thing I tried to do was I gave Omar a red shirt and Hassan a blue shirt. And their clothes don't change too much over the book, but they do change. And Omar's always wearing something that's kind of red, and Omar is wearing something that's blue. And they're the only characters that really wear those colors. So even if it's a big crowd scene, maybe it's a little easier to pick them out because they've got a red shirt and a blue shirt. I don't know if people notice that while they're reading it, but it's something I did as an artist to try and make them stand out.
That seems like a great way to do it, is with color. And it's wonderful that we have color as part of our comics and graphic novels. And, for Max Meow, I do the same thing, in that Max has orange is really his inspiring color. And if you see Max when he is not wearing his costume, he has a patch over his eye that is an orange patch. And really, I try to keep orange away from all the other characters. And then Mindy, who is his friend, she actually becomes a superhero later on. Purple seems to be her main color. And, it's one of those things where it really helps a lot to do that. And, that even ties in with creating characters from their personalities. Mindy loves science, and Max, he just wants to be a superhero. So he's got the traditional lightning bolt, whereas Mindy puts a beaker on the front of her costume. And I I don't know, Victoria, do your characters kind of draw themselves in a way sometimes when you're doing that?
Yeah, I think I definitely try and think of what my characters like, and that informs how they dress. I hate shopping for myself. Oh, this page won't show it. I hate shopping for myself, but I love to dress my characters. So here's a page from my new book, which you won't be able to tell now because they're all wearing the same shirt. But this kid runs cross country. So he's always wearing kind of like a running shirt and running shorts. Whereas the older brother, you can kind of see he's got this collared shirt on and like cuffed pants, like he's more into fashion. So I try and think about the characters' personalities and what they like to wear, and that helps set them apart too. And John, I really like what you said about the colors, because I think in that second book, in the donuts, I'll just call it the donuts book, not to give a spoiler, but there are clones of Max and Mindy that come into the scene. I thought it was really interesting the way you set them apart, even though they look alike. I think through colors and through little details, you could always tell which one was Max and which one was his imposter, which must have been hard.
Right. Yes. Because that was where I was bringing science in, because even though this is for middle grade kids, 7 to 10-year-olds and up and lower, I wanted to talk about the multiverse, like the infinite Earth theories and quantum physics. Like, it's funny, I'm just trying to wedge it in there, but I had no idea how hard it was going to be when it was just in pencil and black and white, because I would start to get confused as to which character was which. And I think I gave my editor, Shayna, some sleepless nights keeping track. But once the color came in, it did make things a lot easier.
Yeah. I don't know if I have any good pages to show it, but we talked briefly before we started about our future projects. And my next project is a retelling of The Parent Trap, the Disney movie, The Parent Trap. So it's identical twins, but I got so confused in some scenes, like which twin am I working on? How to make them look different? So this isn't the best scene, but one kid is more neat, like she tucks in her shirt. She's not very messy. Whereas the other kid, she's got like a purple streak in her hair. She dresses like, I don't know, I think she calls it retro grunge in some scene. So I had to really think about their personalities. And even though they're twins, like how am I going to make them identifiable to readers and so kids can tell them apart? It was pretty tricky. I feel your editor and I feel your pain. I'm like keeping those characters straight. I
know. Well, I remember being so fascinated with both Parent Trap movies and how they made it seem very seamless. Like there's plenty of bad versions of these movies. But what Haley Mills, who played in the first one, she had a bit of a British accent. So they would play, they played up, what was she, Bostonian or something? And then Lindsay Lohan's version, she actually lived in London. And I mean, when you can do audio, that gives you that chance to separate them a little further. Visually can be tough.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to be fun.
That's something I didn't consider. It sounded so fun when I started. And then when I got into it, I was like, wait a second, this is really hard.
I have a question here. You guys were talking about, how your drawings develop. One of the questions here is about how the stories come along for you. I guess that goes with the whole inspiration question too.
Do you want to start, John?
Sure. Well, Max Meow has kind of an interesting story, because I've done other comics and they were often, in a way, I did one about a teen sidekick called Buzz Boy. And for me, it was, at the time, Robin, the Boy Wonder, he had become this character Nightwing, and he was very dark. And I thought, oh, he should be fun and goofy. And I was like, okay, I'll create that. Well, Max Meow, what was really cool about creating the story and even the character was it came from teaching a class, an after-school comics class. And it was kind of built because to be different and original, and because there are always some students that go in, and I bet some people can relate, they know just what they want to draw. And they're like, Mr. Gallagher, just go, leave me alone. I'm going to draw a masterpiece of a comic. But other kids were frozen. They didn't know what to draw. So I said, okay, let's all gather up and let's create a character together. And I said, what should we draw? And someone said Dogman, because of course they were a Dogman fan. I said, well, there's already a Dogman. Let's do a cat character. And this is very early on, and I have to admit, I had only looked at one of the books at that point, but we came up with a cat superhero, and someone suggested a scientist, and another said, have her be an evil robot. And we all kind of took turns drawing it sometimes and writing, and it was really out of this sort of throwing things that everybody liked together that I came up with the character. We called him Captain Cat, but it was such a fun sort of character that I just wanted to do more things with it. And you know, for me, Max becoming a superhero was my dream as a kid. But as you get older, you realize, like, just because you're good at something doesn't mean, just like you were saying, Victoria, there's some great artists out there, but they may not be great storytellers possibly. And I wanted Max to have to learn how to be a superhero. He wasn't going to do everything perfect, because I think a lot of kids feel like they have to be perfect the first time, and that's why they won't start drawing a comic. Or, you know, so I wanted Max kind of has the opposite problem. He thinks he's perfect as it is. His friend Mindy has to be like, maybe you should practice a little bit before you go and try to, you know, save somebody who's stuck in a tree. And in the first book, he actually does try to save someone and uses his electric tail and just zaps the tree. He knocks all the leaves and apples out of the tree, and the character that's stuck in the tree is still stuck. So for me, you know, some of it was tying in from my own childhood, and some of it was from just finding things that I felt other kids might enjoy and relate to.
Now, since you talked about Calvin and Hobbes, I'm seeing more and more correlations between the two, because that's how I think of Calvin too, where he just thinks he's like the best at everything, and Hobbes maybe has to hold him back and be like, slow down. But I like how you have the balance of the two. Like in the second book, Mindy is kind of too afraid to use her powers. Like she's too concerned with being perfect. So I think it's nice you show, because I mean, there are kids who are on both ends of the spectrum. It's nice that you're showing that, you know, you could both be superheroes, just, you know, have confidence in yourself if you don't.
Right. And that is a thing. I'll see it with kids when they become better artists, then suddenly they don't want to mess up because they're known as the good artist. And yeah, it's kind of unfair what they do to themselves. So I wanted, in the second book, I wanted to kind of throw out that idea that it's being different. And which sort of ties in, it reminds me of your book, All's Fair, in that in your book, sometimes you have the characters portray themselves as one type of person in front of some people and another person in front of other people. And, you know, that's also true of Roller Girl, where your characters sometimes, you know, they have to become something or psych themselves up. Is that something that you yourself relate to, or is it stories that you read that inspired you for that?
Yeah. Well, as you were talking about creating your character as like you know, working in a group with other kids and getting ideas from everyone, I think we do that differently, at least for my books so far. Because usually at the very beginning of a book, I'm very, very private. And I kind of have to keep these stories in my head, and I don't show anybody, and I don't tell it to anybody, because the stories in the beginning just feel so fragile and delicate that I need to protect it as it's growing in its little cocoon. So yeah, I think a lot of my books, you know, besides When Stars Are Scattered, which isn't about my life, but deal with like the inner workings and my own memories. So it kind of comes from a more personal place, even if it comes out as roller derby or Renaissance fairs. And When Stars Are Scattered was different because it wasn't my life story. It wasn't any of my memories. It was kind of the opposite, where I really tried to take myself out as much as I could. Anytime I tried to inject my thoughts or my opinions, it just was bad. It didn't work and it wasn't appropriate. So that was a story where instead of trying to tell a story, I was really listening carefully to a story. But even though all my books are really different, I think they all start from just a place of curiosity or something that I really care a lot about. So whether it's roller derby or Renaissance fairs. And with When Stars Are Scattered, it was just a topic I was really curious about and didn't know much about. So I just wanted to learn more about it. So I kind of think of my books as ways to educate myself about things that I'm curious about and want to become more involved with. Books are kind of my way in some ways.
That's awesome, guys. We keep have questions pouring in. One that I see here that I'm curious to know too is, will there be a second volume of All's Fair in middle school? Victoria? I know you were just talking about being private and keeping it close to the vest, but.
I get questions about that, more about Roller Girl, about sequels. So I've thought about it, especially for Roller Girl, but I try really hard with each of my books. Like, I feel like Max Meow is different, like, you know it's a sequel, but I didn't envision either Roller Girl or All's Fair as a series. I wanted very much to have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and to have it wrap up really concisely, like to be really satisfying at the end of the book. I love a book where I close it and I'm like, that was perfect. And yeah, I've been kind of reluctant to do a sequel for that reason, and because I have other ideas that I'm working on. So I never say never, but it's not in the works right now.
Yeah, I can, with Roller Girl, I remember reading it and thinking, oh, what could they do next? And I think maybe that's my tendency with all of it, and maybe your readers have that natural expectation or what, but sometimes it's just great when you can feel like this is the most fantastic story that can ever happen to this character. And with Roller Girl, I mean, what was doubly neat was finding out that you actually did roller derby yourself.
Yeah, that was pretty fun. I tried to start roller derby again, thinking that maybe I would do a sequel, but yeah, it didn't happen.
And you worked at a Renaissance fair too.
I did. And I think, I don't know if you had this, John, but one of my struggles as a writer and as an illustrator is knowing what people would like me to do. Like, I know my editor would be thrilled if I did a sequel to Roller Girl. I know kids would be really happy because kids ask me all the time. And so it can be hard as an author to kind of follow what you really want to do and to know what you want to do. Sometimes I'm confused. I don't know what I want to do. So that's been a kind of a struggle as I'm, building more of a career and writing more books, really trying to focus, since books take so long, graphic novels take such a long time, really making sure that this is exactly the story I want to do and I have to do it.
Right. Well, and that's a really good point, is that a lot of people may not realize how long we have to work on these. The Max Meow, the first Max Meow book, from the time we agreed to do the book all the way to the time it came out was close to 2 years. And that's even quick. Some take longer. My process for creating each book is actually quicker now, but it is one of those things that I know it's probably true for you, Victoria. I mean, I think the Max Meow book that just came out, it was done a full year before it actually hit bookstores, just so they could let people know that it was coming.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. And I think everyone would love to learn a little bit more about that process, even if you wanted to share your creative space or anything like an inspiration, favorite comics or graphic novels from your childhood. I know you shared Shazam there, John. But first, would you care to just talk a little bit about what happens to Max in Pugs from Planet X, the one that will be coming out available at libraries in a couple months?
Sure. Well, I'll tell you, I mentioned that in book 1, Max accidentally gets a piece of this meatball from outer space, and he accidentally eats it and gets superpowers. So nothing really happens much with the meatball in book 2. They're focused mostly on donuts at that point, which, as we all should be at times. But in book 3, they finally find out where this meatball from outer space came from. And there are 3 very grumpy pug aliens that are coming to, let's see, I don't know if you'll be able to really see, whoa, where is it? Here's one of the pug aliens on a jetpack, and you can see his spaceship actually looks kind of like a grumpy dog. And the 3 of them come for that space meatball, but they're not really the owners of the meatball either. And Max and Mindy, they're sort of facing, trouble with these aliens. And what's really interesting about this story is not only does a new hero come and join them, a space dog. His name is Rex Rocket, and he's a wiener dog that can stretch. So I refer to him as Rex Rocket Cosmic Wiener. And so far, everybody seems to like that. But what's really interesting is the supervillains from the first 2 books, like they're supervillains, but also they're from this city of Kittyopolis. So when these aliens come and it looks like they're going to destroy Kittyopolis, they actually want to team up with Max and Mindy. And that's kind of the theme of book 3 is some of the characters like being heroes and others want to go back to being villains. And, you know, so there's a lot of different elements popping up. But a big part of it just came because my son said, I really want to see Max in like armor or like a spacesuit. And just from that idea came this whole idea. And Max is only in the spacesuit for like 2 pages. But I will tell you that I actually, for this book 3, I actually did create like a puppet version of the spaceship as my guide. I don't usually do that, and if you kind of look over here, I actually have like a whole mini version of the city that I used as my guideline for. I'm not going to say that I don't play with the city some days, but hopefully there'll be like a little mini video of that when the book's about to come out.
That's so cool. I love to see that. Yeah. I actually do that sometimes myself, maybe only once. So I keep this on my desk next to me. This is a character that I've never written a book about, but I've just been thinking about Martha for 15 years maybe. And I keep Martha next to me, and every once in a while I look over at Martha. She looks like really creepy, but she's a moth. And her story is like she's got butterfly friends who are, you know, really popular, and Martha just likes to go to parties and like look at a lamp and then eat the curtains. And so obviously I've never written a book because that's kind of a terrible book idea. But yeah, having a little character that I can sometimes play with and pretend, I think that's a big part of being an author of books for kids, is pretending and imagining and letting your imagination go, which is kind of hard to do as a grown-up when you have to like pay taxes and bills and stuff. So things like this kind of help me get in that mindset of a kid. But I love that movie set. I'm curious about your working process and how you actually make your books. So when I start a project, I'm a big paper gal. And so I have lots of notebooks. I'm always doodling. This was my notebook for When Stars Are Scattered. You know, Omar and I would talk about his story and I would just write them down and draw pictures. And every step of the process until I get to the very end for color is paper. Like I do my sketches on paper. I even print out my manuscripts, even though I can look at them on a screen, because I just like having paper in front of me so I can sit on my sofa or sit in bed and be comfortable and not stare at a screen, and I can cross things out and make changes. And then even my final art, I can show you 2 pages of final art. My final art is on paper, and I do it with paintbrushes and ink. And it takes a little longer. I know many artists work digitally, and I kind of wish I could do that. But I just like working on paper so much that I just want to keep doing it. And in some ways, I kind of make myself slow down by doing this. It gives me a lot of time to think about my stories, and I can think more about the characters and things I want to add. So it gives me that time to really get to know my story. I'll show you one more thing I did by hand. One of my favorite things to do when I'm creating books is combining traditional and digital art. So for all the starry scenes and When Stars Are Scattered, I remember it was a Friday night that I was in my studio, because I remember thinking, wow, this is a really fun Friday night. And I was not being sarcastic, where I just got some Frisket, that's kind of like a masking agent for watercolor, dotted all over the paper, sprinkled some salt, and just made ink washes until it looked like a universe. So I took this paper and scanned it, and I combined it with colors in Photoshop to make it look like the stars that you see when stars are scattered. So like on the cover, the stars that you see here, kind of those same stars. But I still do a lot of stuff by hand. And I was wondering, reading the Max Meow, if they were done by hand or digitally.
Well, but before I answer, I wanted to ask you, so when you did the stars, did you try to make it actually like a constellation, or was it just very randomized?
Yeah, I just sprinkled some salt and sprinkled some dots in there. I wasn't trying for constellations.
That's great. I remember like finding out that one of my favorite comic artists when I was in college, that he used like a toothbrush. He would paint things black and then take like white paint on a toothbrush. And I remember like coming home and doing that in my parents', like where I coming home from college, but I was working on this pool table in my parents' basement. And I'm like, oh, this is awesome. And then realized that I had not put anything down. So there were white specks all over the pool table. And luckily my parents were used to me doing crazy things like that, and my whole life, so they just were like, okay, yeah, that's so. Luckily my kids are lucky because I don't get really caught up when something gets drawn on, or because my parents dealt with much worse than me. But it's funny because I am old enough that, you know, if there were no iPads, there were no drawing tablets that attached to computers, there were not really any personal computers until I was in college. And so I drew everything traditional, and I read How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way, and was very much into the Marvel and DC superheroes, and wanted to draw it just like my heroes did. Jack Kirby and Alex Toth and Will Eisner, and they all drew on 11 by 17 paper with pencils, and then they had inks, and then they'd erase the pencils. And I ended up having a problem that could only be solved digitally, and that was I studied graphic design, and as an illustrator, I would draw stuff and I would try to make it look so perfect that sometimes it started to look like just like clip art, or it didn't have very much life. Like I would lose all the life to it. So a couple of years ago, I bought an iPad that had different kinds of brushes, and they actually forced me to draw in a scratchier and simpler way. So I actually use a brush on my iPad called the Watterson, which is based on Bill Watterson's brush from Calvin and Hobbes. But I've also used, there's also a Schultz brush from Charlie Brown. And it's really interesting because what I found is my style is much more organic when I work in a digital format. And that's not, I don't know if there's anyone else that has that exact same experience, but I do work mostly digitally. And it's interesting because I was going to ask you, do you always write an entire manuscript or script before you start drawing the comic pages?
I usually do. I mean, when it starts off, like when I'm starting a new idea, it's almost always drawing first, like a lot of just messy drawings and messy sketches. But before I start drawing any panels, I do write an entire manuscript. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm kind of still doing it kind of the way, like the first comic I made was when I was 5, and I just took some paper and folded it in half, and I drew a cover, and then I just drew some boxes for my panels. And it's not that much different now. What I will do is, usually it starts off with I write a letter to my editor, usually, or to myself, and I basically just give them a quick plot of what the story is. And then I write a second kind of letter, and that's more like where I describe what happens in each chapter. But then I go and I just start, like, so let's say this is the page, I just start drawing, and I'll figure out what I want to have happen. And I may draw like stick figures. And then I'll actually write like, you know, hey, Mindy. And I'll write on, it's almost like I'm just drawing on paper, creating a whole comic, but everything is just kind of stick figures. And luckily my editor, Shayna, she knows that this is, you know, this is Max with the C on his head. And Mindy has glasses and curly hair. And so I keep it really, really loose. And then what I'll do is once I've gotten through like the entire draft, and somehow Shayna can read what I'm doing, she will give me advice, and I slowly finalize it. And then what I actually will do is I kind of add a second layer, which is white, and then I draw on top of that. So it's basically the very first sketches I do become my pencils. And then I go in with black and sort of finalize that. But there's a lot of back and forth where I'll go in and I can grab panels and move them around. And I think some of that ties in with my graphic design training, working with magazines and stuff, is that somehow works better for me, that I can sort of shuffle things around a little bit.
That's so interesting, so cool. And I love all the love for Calvin and Hobbes. We're big fans in our house too.
Right. But I should say, everybody, like the big mistake I used to make was, if I could just find that perfect pen or that perfect brush, then I could draw all these great comics. And it's like, now I meet people like, what kind of iPad do you have? And I'm like, I don't know. And, you know, I talk to people about pencils. Like when I draw on paper, I use a Ticonderoga #2, just like the one I had in school. And it's really, it's not about, it's about the ideas. It's not about the tools that you're using. So what Victoria is doing is the same as what I'm doing, because it's all coming from up here.
Well, we have a few more audience questions, but hoping that we can do one more sort of interactive thing together. Actually, not me, just you guys, because you're the cool artists, writers. A prompt, and maybe just share an image, and like, you know, if you care to, like one page, one scene, based off the prompt. Does that sound okay to you guys?
Sure.
And everyone can follow along at home and do it too. The prompt is, it is summertime, and a child has discovered something mysterious on the way or in his or her or their public library, their local library. What have they discovered?
Okay. So I'm going to share a little tip that I do when I ever draw anything. I almost always draw a rectangle first. And let's see if John does it.
Usually I either make the paper the rectangle, or I'll do exactly the same thing.
Yeah. I don't know, I've just kind of gotten used to it. Okay.
And what I often do, when I talk with kids about drawing comics, is like, if I think of this as the whole page, I always tell them it's great. Think about a cartoon or a TV show. There's often an establishing shot. So in my case, maybe I would draw the outside of the library with like a sign that says, like, you know, Kiddiopolis Library. And I love like props, like giant props. So when I used to read Batman, there were always these giant, like, you know, they'd go to a gambling convention where the Riddler was, and there'd be giant dice or a giant roulette wheel. So I always try to add things like, you know, maybe have a giant book attached to the library. Like I think that would be a really cool library to have a book. So for me, my first panel is usually some sort of establishing shot, and, you know, maybe it says one day at the library.
And something I like to do when I have drawing, I guess, workshops with kids, is something I find difficult is drawing humans that are a whole body that are doing something. Like a lot of drawings I see from kids are just characters that are standing straight up and down. And it can be harder to take that character, make them look surprised or ride a bicycle. So whenever I'm drawing someone that's doing something with their body, I usually start like this, just like a stick figure. And then I kind of treat that like a skeleton that I can add, you know, build on top of. It's kind of an easy way, especially when I'm doing preliminary sketches, to kind of get the feeling that I want to get across. And then I add the details as I go along. But I always start really simple and then kind of add the details as I go. But
yeah, that's always good to have that. People talk about underdrawing. It doesn't always have to be like you're drawing a skeleton, but it is good to have that basis of reality. And like you said, I learned this from an animator, is when you have your characters very balanced, it doesn't feel like movement. But if you make your characters off balance, like your figure right now is kind of bent over, you can almost see like the gravity pulling them.
Yeah, having your characters not stand straight up and down was a difficult thing for me to learn, but it really helps with your story. And that's the main thing, is having your characters improve the story. Like, I want this character right now to be surprised. So I need their body to look surprised. So my readers believe, oh yeah, that character is pretty surprised at that monster outside the library.
So on this panel, I've got kind of like a secondary establishing shot where I've got 3 characters, and I would draw them looking bored. And one of them is like, I'm so bored. But again, it's almost like pulling in your reader when you do this stuff. And then on the next panel, maybe I would have a close-up of the character, you know, saying something like, why are we stuck here all summer? And, it's almost, it's one of those things where it's often good to look at a book. I always can tell when it's a really great book because I would try to study the books to figure out, okay, they have a close up here and a faraway shot. And before I know it, I was reading the whole book. And that's when you know it's a good book. So, because you just get caught up in the style. You don't, you start to not notice.
So doing exercise like this is fun because you come up with things that I didn't think of. There's some things that you can only come up with while you're drawing. For example, I made this mistake with the character's hair and now she's got like a weird mullet, but I think that's kind of fun. I would never think I'm going to give that character a mullet. So sometimes you just have to draw and have fun and see what happens.
That's the unique character trait, right? The hair and the mullet. So what's that, a monster eating a book?
Oh, it's a monster reading a book. Did you say eating or reading?
I meant reading, yeah.
Okay, I'll try to make it more clear there.
Maybe both.
You never know with monsters.
Yeah, that way. That's definitely something mysterious. And what's going on at Kittyopolis Public Library?
I've had that establishing shot of the library. Then one of the characters says, "I'm so bored," and then one of the other characters says, "Look," and this is something that I'll do with my books often. Is it's neat to have the reader feel like they're part of the crew or the group. So I have the two characters on the side with something that's going to be happening in the middle. And in this case, I wrote a ghost. And, there's a librarian ghost that's kind of maybe walking through the library. Probably not unlike the librarian ghost in Ghostbusters. But what I'll probably do is I'll have the one that was so bored all the time. Like this character is already starting to develop. Maybe she's always bored no matter what's going on. And she just says, the person's like, "It's a ghost." And she just goes, "Meh." She's not affected by it.
I've seen ghosts before.
Yeah. And this is about as detailed as my early pages get, and what's fun is I probably would have to go look at pictures of, a Victorian dress to draw my ghost. And you said something about research, Victoria. I love having to look things up and the internet is so great for that.
Mm-hmm. And I did the same thing where my first drawings are really rough, where I can just get the idea and the emotion and the story across. And then I go back and find the details to make it look more realistic.
Right.
This was so much fun. Thank you, guys. I feel like this was so therapeutic for, I don't know if the rest of the audience feels that way, but I didn't even do any of the drawing, and but I think I might do it tonight. What would I find in my library? But thank you so much. It's so much fun. We only have a few minutes left, and I want to make sure we get to the audience questions. So let's see here. Okay, let's hold on. How do your kids approach drawing and storytelling? Having parents who can draw and write books may be daunting for the kids who to also do it, but also maybe fun too. I guess a good follow-up question to that would be, there are probably a lot of kids or librarians watching who are kids come to the library who want to make a career of art or graphic novels or comics. What do you have? Do you have any words for them?
I wouldn't say my son is intimidated. If anything, he's emboldened by the fact that I make books. And I think we just always have art supplies around. Maybe like John, where you don't care if your family ruins your house. Like we just have, in the dining room, we have an art station where we always have colored pencils and markers and pencils. And earlier during COVID, I showed my son how to, take pages and staple them in the middle. We made little booklets. He wrote like 53 in 2 weeks. So he thinks writing books are easy and that anyone can do it. Maybe because he sees me do it all the time. And one great thing about being an author for me is that having a kid is I'm always reading books. So I'm always on the lookout for new books. Maybe one downside is that I've gotten a lot of autographed books. So every time we read a book, my son Oscar is like, "Why doesn't it say to Oscar in the beginning?" And we need to fix that with Max Meow, by the way. I gotta get you to sign a copy somehow.
Yes.
But overall, he seems to like it.
Oh, that's great. Well, my kids all enjoyed drawing their own comics when they were younger. Each one took on storytelling in a different way. So my oldest, who's in college now, she is into theater and enjoys acting and designing stage craft. My youngest is he's more inspired by my nephew, who does special effects for all the superhero TV shows. And so he's working on his own films. He's making a Star Wars film right now with some of his friends. And then my middle child, Jack, who's in high school, he's maybe more of the Mindy. He's going to pursue the science aspect of the things that are so interesting to me. So that's what's really neat. I grew up in a house where I was the only one for generations that did art. And my brother is a doctor. My sister was in business. And what was so great that, was that my parents were like, great, be the best artist, be the best doctor, be the best business person. It was more about just letting your kids know how excited you were that they were trying things. And, so my advice to kids wanting to go to school to be an artist is try things, find out the kind of things that you enjoy, and keep trying to learn. Like, that's why the libraries are so great. I actually am going back home to my hometown this weekend, and I'm going to drop off some books at the library that I spent hours at, just walking through, just pulling books off the shelves because they looked cool. So
nice.
All right, we have one question for each one of you and a question for both of you. And then unfortunately, the hour just flew by. Thank you so much for being here. Victoria, we had a question from the audience, a mother who read When Stars Are Scattered with her 10-year-old son, and it led to a lot of really, rewarding and fruitful conversation about refugees. And she was wondering if you plan on writing more, working on more memoir, nonfiction with others, and leaning more towards that.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure. I mean, it was such an empowering project to work on, and I was so honored to work on the project. Omar and I have talked about writing a sequel because a lot of people ask, well, what happens next? What happens after he reaches America? What's his life like? And he's got so many interesting stories, interesting and funny stories of adjusting to life in the United States. But it's something we've talked about, and maybe, who knows, maybe in the future. I think Omar might be working on his own projects soon, so you'll be hearing more from Omar, and a collaboration might be happening. So yeah, and as for working with other people, I've spoken to a few other people, and I guess I hope to give as much advice as I can. I'm not sure if I will do it again, but it's something I'll always keep on my radar.
Great. And John, more questions about the Max Meow series. One about, can you read each one as a standalone? I think you can, but if you have your own kind of answer to that. And then the other was how you keep track of all the details from one book to another so that there's consistency. So I guess something as small as, big as that C on his head to other things.
Right. Well, the answer to the first question is each of these is designed so you can read them independently. I always have, at the end of every chapter, one of the things I do is I have questions like, what will happen to Max and Mindy? And it's kind of inspired from the old Batman TV show of the 60s. And in the books, at the beginning of every book, I have sort of a playback on who Max and Mindy are and what Kiddiopolis is about. So that way everybody can pick it up wherever they are. And I've had my first round of kids that read Donuts in Danger first. And then they were like, is it okay, that I read that first? I'm like, you're going to be fine. So yeah, that's definitely a good thing to say. Yes, you could do that. And then finally, as far as the question of how do you keep track of it all, sometimes I don't. Sometimes I just am drawing so fast that my editor would have to go, John, you've changed this belt 3 times. And I like to think it's because I'm such a genius that I've got to do that like this. But I actually have a production assistant named Robert Deans that I've hired him now to go through my books and actually read through and make sure like the C isn't backwards, which I've done. Like, well, I'll be drawing and I'll flip the character because I don't like the angle. And he helps me with the color because, yeah, sometimes you get too close to it. It's easy to miss things that, you know, it's just like having an editor for any paper that people are writing. It's good to have a fresh pair of eyes take a look at it.
Very cool. I learned so much today. I'm sure everyone watching has too. I guess the final question is, you know, directly, you know, for the kids and their librarians watching, any parting words, especially, you know, I find that even if subtly in some cases and not in others, your books touch on, you know, being kind, being true to yourself, heroism, you know, and all that good stuff. Do you, what does being a hero mean to you guys? And do you have any parting words for the readers out there as they enjoy their summer?
Yeah, well, first of all, enjoy your summer. After this year, I think we all deserve an enjoyable, relaxing summer. And I think, you know, something we sort of talked about before, but it can be easy to get worked up about art or think that you're either too good and you don't want to spoil it, or you're not good at drawing, so you just won't try. But I love to see kids trying to draw. And I guess that would be my advice to anyone who wants to be an illustrator or make comics, is just to draw and have fun. Kind of like my summer advice, just have fun with it, because that's what I try and do every day. That's my goal, is to have fun making the art that I'm putting into books. So if you like to draw, but you're worried you're not good enough, who cares? If you're having fun, that's the most important thing. So just keep drawing and you'll get better.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And, you know, as far as what makes a hero for a story, for me, the point of the first book is to realize that it's not about being stronger than the other guy. It's about being a good person and helping people, even if you don't have powers, which happens to Max at one point. And I think, you know, I don't like bullies, and and that kind of shows up in my books as well. And it's usually where I think is heroes are strong because they are good and nice. And I think that's, you know, that's something we all have to remember. And thankfully we've had plenty of great teachers and educators and librarians helping young readers through this whole period. And it's just, you know, so be like your teachers and and follow that. But and I would say that too is, you know, don't be so hard on yourself. I meet so many kids, or I talk to parents and go, did you want to throw away your artwork when you were, you know, 10? And I'm like, of course I did, but my mom wouldn't let me. And, you know, it's one of those things, like, don't expect to draw it perfectly. You know, the way you get good at anything is to do it, you know, if you can do it 15 minutes a day, that is great. And, you know, like Victoria said, have fun.
Wow, great advice for us all. A really, really fun hour. For those who, I think we answered most, if not all, the questions, but again, your website, Victoria's victoriajamieson.com, John's maxmeow.com, and I'm sure you can be reached, you know, folks reach out to you all the time with more questions. John, the next book is Max Meow, Pugs from Planet X in this September, and Victoria working on a Parent Trap adoption, and the last title, When Stars Were Scattered, and favorites of us all, or books added to our to be read pile for sure. And thank you so much. And for folks out there, you can check out this recording on our website, cats.baker-taylor.com. And we hope that you enjoy the rest of your summer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thanks.